Today, I will reveal one of the secrets of World War II. I will tell you about the hidden camps that no one talks about. World War II is not just the roar of tanks and reports from the front lines. It is millions of quiet, personal stories of survival that are not written about in textbooks. In the mud of the trenches, in cold dugouts, and on long marches, another war was being fought. A war for life, where resourcefulness became the main weapon. Soldiers became engineers, cooks, and doctors all rolled into one, turning trash into priceless artifacts. In these inhuman conditions, everyday things took on a whole new meaning. Heroism was evident not only in attacks, but also in the quiet, daily struggle against circumstances. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how an ordinary cartridge case could provide more heat than a fire, and why the ability to dry socks properly was valued no less than the ability to shoot accurately. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of trench life, which saves soldiers from cold and despair. Fire was the center of the soldiers' universe, but matches would get wet in the constant dampness of the trenches. Therefore, the creation of the trench lighter was not a whim, but an act of pure survival. The basis for this marvel of engineering was an ordinary brass rifle cartridge case. It could be found in abundance after any battle. Brass was resistant to rust and strong enough to withstand the hardships of frontline life. A wick twisted from threads of a greatcoat or any other suitable material was tightly packed inside the cartridge case. This wick was soaked in gasoline, kerosene, or any other combustible liquid that could be obtained. This system was much more reliable than fragile matches. The most difficult element was the flint for striking sparks. It was carved from a piece of a file or any other hardened metal. Special stones from factory lighters or even fragments of ordinary stones of suitable hardness were used as flint. The wheel for striking sparks was often made from a coin or metal button. Its surface was painstakingly notched so that it would catch on the flint. This work required patience, but the result was worth the effort. The assembled structure was compact, airtight, and practically eternal. It was not afraid of water, dirt, or falls. Such a lighter could serve its owner for months, requiring only periodic refueling. These devices became so popular that their manufacture turned into a real craft. Craftsmen exchanged their products for food or tobacco. Each lighter was unique, often decorated with the owner's initials. A reliable source of fire allowed you to boil a mug of water, heat up canned food, or light a cigarette. This small flame in the cold darkness of the dugout was a symbol of life. It warmed not only the hands, but also the soul. Having such a simple but reliable device gave the soldier a sense of control over the situation. It was his small personal victory over the chaos of war. The fire he could carry in his pocket was his personal sun. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What small thing do you think could lift your spirits in such conditions? Write about it in the comments. What if I told you that everything you believed about the main dangers of war was not true? Often, the biggest killer on the front lines was not the enemy, but invisible microbes in dirty water. Dysentery and typhoid fever wiped out entire battalions, so the fight for clean water was as important as the fight for high ground. The most reliable method of disinfection was boiling. This method, known since ancient times, was guaranteed to kill most dangerous bacteria. Soldiers were instructed to boil any water from open sources for at least 10 minutes. However, lighting a fire on the front line was tantamount to suicide. Smoke and flames instantly revealed their position, attracting sniper and artillery fire. Therefore, chemical methods of disinfection were used. The standard ration of British and American soldiers included special tablets. Most often, these were chlorine or iodine-based tablets. They were easy to use and quite effective. It was enough to drop 1 or 2 tablets into a flask of water and wait about half an hour. The water acquired an unpleasant medicinal taste, but became safe to drink. It was a small price to pay for health and life. Soviet soldiers often used potassium permanganate, crystals of which were found in every first aid kit. A few crystals were dissolved in a pot or flask until a pale pink solution was obtained. This method also effectively killed bacteria. When there was no fire or chemicals at hand, soldiers built improvised filters. The simplest filter was made of several layers of fabric, between which sand and charcoal from a fire were laid. This did not kill germs, but it did clean the water of dirt. For a more complex filter, they used an empty tin can with holes punched in the bottom. The can was filled layer by layer with fabric, grass, sand, and crushed charcoal. The water passing through these layers became noticeably cleaner. Experienced soldiers knew how to determine the quality of water by indirect signs. They avoided stagnant water with an unpleasant odor and unnatural color. Preference was always given to running water from streams and springs. Discipline in the matter of water purification was ironclad. Officers and sergeants strictly ensured that soldiers did not drink from untested sources. The combat effectiveness of the entire unit depended directly on this. Water was the source of life, but it had to be made safe. In the next chapter, you will learn how ordinary food was turned into a multifunctional tool that could not only feed but also warm. What I am about to show you was the secret weapon of survival for every British soldier. Delivering hot food to the front lines was a virtually impossible task. Thermoses with food arrived at the trenches already cold, and it was impossible to set up a field kitchen under fire. Therefore, British soldiers, known as Tommies, invented an ingenious device called the Tommy cooker. This miniature stove allowed them to heat food and boil water right in their dugouts. It was based on a regular tin can from condensed milk or jam. The secret of the Tommy cooker was its smokeless fuel. Soldiers took a strip of cloth or a piece of rope and rolled it into a tight spiral. This spiral was placed at the bottom of an empty tin can. Then the wick was poured with melted fat from canned meat or any other available fat. After the fat solidified, a large trench candle was obtained. It gave an even, almost smokeless flame that could burn for several hours. The manufacturing process was simple and did not require any special tools. An empty can, a rag, and fat were all that was needed. The availability of materials made this invention truly widespread. On such an improvised stove, it was possible to heat up a portion of stew or boil a mug of water for tea. To do this, a metal mug or a pot lid was placed on top of the can. It was a real luxury in the damp and cold trenches. Tommy Cook provided not only hot food, but also a little warmth. In a damp dugout, even such a small flame could warm frozen hands. It was a small haven of comfort in the midst of the hell of war, which boosted morale. This invention became so popular and effective that it was even included in the official British survival manuals. Its simplicity and reliability made the Tommy cooker an indispensable companion for British soldiers. It was a symbol of the ability to find simple solutions to complex problems. This story is a vivid example of how resourcefulness can turn everyday objects into valuable resources. In wartime, an empty tin can became the heart of a soldier's life. It provided what was so lacking on the front lines: hot food and warmth. Soldiers' ingenuity found a way out of any situation, even the most hopeless. Tommy Cook proves that the will to live can work real miracles. It was a small triumph of man over circumstances. Are you ready to learn the truth about how to find your way when all the maps lie? The ability to navigate the terrain was a vital skill, especially for scouts and saboteurs. Not everyone had standard army compasses, and they could be lost or broken. Therefore, every soldier had to be able to determine the cardinal directions using improvised means. The most well-known method was to use a wristwatch with hands. It worked in any clear weather and required only knowledge of a simple rule. The watch was placed horizontally, with the hour hand pointing at the sun. The angle between the hour hand and the number 12 on the dial was divided in half. The line dividing this angle pointed south. When there was no watch at hand, an even more ancient method using a stick was used. A stick was stuck vertically into the ground, and the end of its shadow was marked with a stone. After 15-20 minutes, the new position of the shadow was marked with a second stone. The line connecting the two marks indicated the direction from west to east. The first mark was always in the west and the second in the east. Knowing this, it was easy to determine the other points of the compass. In cloudy weather or at night, these methods did not work. Then the soldiers' ingenuity came to the rescue. It was possible to create an improvised compass from a sewing needle or a razor blade. To do this, the needle had to be magnetized by running it several times in one direction across a woolen cloth. The magnetized needle was carefully placed on a leaf of a tree, lowered into a puddle or a pot of water. Floating freely, one end of the needle always pointed north. Experienced soldiers knew how to navigate using natural features. They knew that moss on trees grows mainly on the north side. Anthills are usually located on the south side of the nearest tree or stump. They also paid attention to tree crowns, which are usually denser on the south side. The annual rings on the stumps of felled trees were also wider on the south side. All these signs together gave a fairly accurate idea of the directions. These simple but effective techniques were part of the mandatory training for Special Forces soldiers. They proved that a soldier's main weapon is not only his rifle, but also his mind. Finding the way was half the battle, but how to maintain the ability to walk. In the next chapter, you will learn about the insidious enemy that attacks soldiers without firing a single shot. One of the most insidious dangers of trench warfare was the so-called trench foot. This condition was caused by prolonged exposure of the feet to cold and dampness. As a result, thousands of soldiers became disabled without even receiving a combat wound. The conditions in the trenches were ideal for the development of this disease. Constant dampness, mud, and cold water accumulating at the bottom of the trenches created a deadly threat. Soldiers' feet were in wet boots for hours on end. In the early stages, the disease manifested itself in loss of sensation and tingling. Then the feet swelled and became covered with ulcers. In advanced cases, gangrene developed, requiring immediate amputation. The command of all armies quickly realized the scale of the problem. Losses from trench foot in some units exceeded combat losses. Combating this disease became a priority. The basis of prevention was a simple instruction: keep your feet dry and warm. Soldiers were ordered to carry at least 2 pairs of spare socks or foot cloths. Wet socks had to be changed for dry ones at least once a day. A whole system was set up. While one pair of socks was on their feet, soldiers dried the other pair under their greatcoats on their own bodies. This primitive method was the only one possible in the absence of fires. British soldiers were given special whale oil as a preventive measure. This oil had to be carefully rubbed into the feet before putting on dry socks. The oil created a water-repellent layer that protected the skin from moisture. Mandatory daily inspections were introduced in the units. Officers and sergeants checked the condition of their subordinates' feet. Soldiers had to work in pairs, helping each other examine their feet. Soldiers could face severe punishment for failing to comply with hygiene rules. Commanders understood that a soldier with trench foot was a non-combat loss. Discipline in this matter was the key to the combat readiness of the entire unit. These measures significantly reduced the number of cases of the disease. Simple rules, changing socks and regular inspections, saved more soldiers' feet than all medical supplies. This was a case where prevention proved more important than treatment. The secret that dispelled the darkness and despair in the deepest dugouts was simple. Long nights in the trenches were filled not only with cold, but also with pitch darkness. Any open source of light could attract the attention of a sniper or artillery. Therefore, soldiers needed a safe, compact, and smokeless source of light and heat. The solution was found in a simple design called a trench candle. It required the simplest of materials to make. An empty tin can, corrugated cardboard, and paraffin or wax were needed. A strip of corrugated cardboard was rolled into a tight roll. This roll was tightly inserted into the tin can. Then the structure was filled with melted paraffin. It had to be poured slowly so that the cardboard was completely saturated. After the paraffin hardened, the finished product was ready. Such a candle burned for a very long time, from 4 to 6 hours. It gave off an even and fairly bright flame. Most importantly, it produced almost no smoke, which made it safe to use on the front lines. The trench candle served several purposes at once. It lit up the dark dugout, allowing soldiers to write letters, clean their weapons, or play cards. This small island of light had enormous psychological significance. In addition to light, the device also provided a noticeable amount of heat. It was enough to warm frozen hands or dry small items of clothing. The flame of such a candle could even be used to heat a mug of water. Soldiers often placed several such candles under a makeshift table or bunk. This created a simple but effective local heating system. The device was a real lifesaver on cold nights. The invention became so popular that entire campaigns were organized in the rear to manufacture them for the front. School children and volunteers folded cardboard and filled it with wax. Thousands of these simple heaters were sent to the front lines. These candles provided heat and light underground. And in the next chapter, we will talk about a gift from heaven that had dozens of uses on Earth. Every downed plane or dropped cargo left behind a valuable resource: a parachute. Dozens of square meters of thin but incredibly durable silk became a real treasure. Knowing how to use it properly was one of the key survival skills. First of all, parachute silk was an ideal material for clothing. It was used to make light scarves, jacket linings, and even underwear. Silk retained heat well and was pleasant to the touch. Parachute straps made of durable nylon were no less valuable. These ropes could withstand enormous loads. They were used to build shelters, set traps, and as shoelaces. Thin silk fabric served as an excellent dressing material. In the absence of sterile bandages, a clean piece of silk could be used for dressing wounds. Its smooth texture did not stick to damaged tissue as much. Silk was also used to make water filters. Folded into several layers, it trapped particles of dirt and sand. This made the water much cleaner before boiling. For pilots who found themselves in enemy territory, the parachute became the basis for temporary shelter. Stretched between trees, the canopy protected from rain and wind. The white silk of winter parachutes served as excellent camouflage in the snow. Maps for pilots and scouts were often printed on silk. Unlike paper, such a map did not get wet in the rain and did not tear. It could be easily hidden by crumpling it into a small ball. Parachute silk became a kind of currency. It could be exchanged with the local population for food or information. The beautiful and durable fabric was highly valued in villages ravaged by war.
It makes you wonder how we ever made it this far.
The most terrible enemy in war was not the enemy, but what was going on in the soldier's head. Constant tension, fear, and the loss of comrades could break anyone. Therefore, developing psychological defenses was no less important than the ability to shoot. One of the main defense mechanisms was black humor. Soldiers joked about death, danger, and the absurdity of what was happening. These jokes, which would seem cynical to civilians, served as a lightning rod in the trenches. The ability to laugh in the face of death was a form of protest against inhuman conditions. It was a way to stay sane in a crazy world. Soldier folklore, jokes and stories helped them not to despair. Another pillar of psychological stability was routine. Strict adherence to the daily schedule created the illusion of order and control. Simple, repetitive actions structured time and prevented soldiers from sinking into dark thoughts. Getting up, cleaning weapons, checking equipment, eating meals on schedule, all of this was important. Even in the most terrible conditions, soldiers tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. They furnished their dugouts, decorating them with photographs of their loved ones. The hunt for additional comforts played a huge role. The ability to obtain trophy chocolate or warm gloves was not only a way to improve daily life. A successful raid boosted self-esteem and gave cause for pride. Letters from home were a thin thread connecting the soldier to peaceful life. The opportunity to read lines from loved ones gave hope. It gave meaning to the whole bloody slaughter.
I wish you were here.
Friendship and military camaraderie were the main sources of support. In the trenches, everyone was equal. Knowing that there were people nearby who could be relied upon helped soldiers survive the most terrible moments. Soldiers learned to live one day at a time without looking too far into the future. They rejoiced in simple things: hot food, dry socks, a moment of silence. This focus on the here and now helped them stay sane. It was these invisible psychological self-defense techniques that served as the armor protecting the soldiers' souls. Without it, even the most sophisticated equipment was useless. In this war, those who learned to cope with their fear were the ones who prevailed. The standard weapons issued in the Army were reliable and widely available, but not always convenient. Each soldier had his own anatomical features and preferences. Therefore, soldiers often tuned their weapons to suit themselves. One of the most common improvements was wrapping various parts of the weapon. The butt and neck of the rifle stock were wrapped with electrical tape or cloth. This made the grip more comfortable and warmer in winter. In summer, this wrapping protected the hands from hot metal. In addition, it eliminated glare that could expose the sniper. It was a simple but very effective solution. Soldiers often made custom handles for pistols or knives. They were carved from wood or molded from plexiglass from downed aircraft. Such handles fit perfectly in the owner's hand. Another area of creativity was field repairs. A lost screw could be replaced with a suitable bolt from any piece of equipment. A cracked rifle stock was tied with wire and glued. Soldiers also made improvised devices for cleaning weapons. If the standard ramrod was lost, it was replaced with strong wire or rope with a rag tied to the end. The cleanliness of a weapon was the key to its reliability. Sometimes ingenuity went even further. There were examples of homemade silencers made from several tin cans placed one on top of the other. Of course, the effectiveness of such devices was questionable, but they demonstrated an inquiring mind. Special attention was paid to carrying ammunition. Uncomfortable standard cartridge pouches were often replaced with homemade bandoliers. They allowed more magazines to be carried and kept them close at hand. Gunsmiths and field workshops worked wonders. They could assemble one working rifle from several damaged ones. Their skills were worth their weight in gold. This constant refinement of equipment was not just a whim. It was a way to make one's weapon an extension of oneself. Soldiers trusted their lives to their weapons, so they wanted to be 100% sure they could rely on them. Soldiers' rations were nutritious but rarely distinguished by their exquisite taste. The monotonous food day after day was depressing and lowered morale. Therefore, field cooking became an important part of frontline life. Soldiers from all armies showed remarkable ingenuity in trying to diversify their diet. The main principle was to mix different components of the ration. Dry biscuits were crumbled into canned meat to make it thicker. If they managed to get hold of flour, they baked flatbread on the lid of a pot or on a hot stone. It was a real treat. The taste of fresh bread reminded them of home and peaceful life. Foraging played a huge role. Any trip outside the camp was an opportunity to find something edible. Wild onions, garlic, sorrel, or mushrooms instantly transformed the taste of bland canned soup. The availability of spices was a real luxury. Salt, pepper, or dried herbs were highly valued. They were saved and used only on special occasions. The process of cooking was an important social ritual. Soldiers gathered around the pot, sharing food and stories. This brought people together and helped them distract themselves from the horrors of war. We have considered only a small part of the tricks that helped soldiers survive the hell of World War II. Behind each of these inventions lies not only ingenuity, but also an unyielding will to live. These stories show that the human spirit is capable of adapting to any conditions, even the most unimaginable ones. War is a tragedy, but it also sometimes reveals the best qualities of human beings: mutual aid, ingenuity, and incredible resilience. The experience of the soldiers of that time is a harsh lesson in how important it is to appreciate peace and the simple things that seem like real treasures in the trenches. Which of these soldier inventions do you find most ingenious and why? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.